Hello everyone, it's Mr. Wolfe here, and in this video I'm going to be introducing diffusion. So before watching this video, you should have already done this. So if you haven't, make sure that you do these three things. First is to watch the pre-demo on molecular motion. So just looking at what happens, how molecules behave in a liquid, and adjusting that temperature button. And then watching the video, what happens when we add a high concentration of molecules to water. Okay? And then lastly, watching this video from Kurzgesagt that just gives some good context of why we care about diffusion in the first place. All right, so diffusion over time. So if we add dye to a beaker, we know that it'll spread out and it just looks really cool too as it does that. And then eventually it just all becomes uniform, right? It all becomes the same color over time. So that visually, I think, is fairly simple. Like that's diffusion, all right? Our goal in this video is to try to apply some scientific terminology to diffusion so we could explore it a little bit more in depth throughout this unit. So one of those first terms is something called a concentration gradient. All right, now as a reminder, you guys could be watching this video and using it to help you complete page 2 of your packet, where you're going to see a lot of these terms: concentration gradient, equilibrium, diffusion, things like that, semi-permeable. So concentration gradient is just this. It's a difference in concentrations across an area. Okay? So for instance, with our beaker, if we put some dye in here, I have a high concentration of dye right here and a low concentration of dye towards the bottom of my beaker. That's it. That's all a concentration gradient is. Now, in this unit, we're going to be talking about cells a lot. And so we're going to be talking about the concentration inside and out of cells. So for instance, in this example, we have a low concentration of these molecules. Let's say that they're glucose molecules outside the cell, and there's a high concentration of glucose molecules inside the cell. We're going to go back. And let's look at this other cell. Now, let's just say instead of glucose, maybe these molecules are now oxygen. So we have a high concentration of oxygen outside the cell and a low concentration of oxygen inside the cell. High concentration outside, low concentration inside, just in case I may have said that wrong. All right, equilibrium, all right, is like our picture right here, what happens at the end. It's when you have the same amount of particles across the area. With diffusion, this will eventually happen. So if I look at my cell example again, right, I have an equal amount of particles inside and outside. That's equilibrium. So diffusion, defining it in a scientific way, is really just using the terms that we just talked about. So visually, again, here's diffusion, right? We have a high concentration of molecules, they spread out. That's diffusion in a simple way, but we could add a little bit more complexity and we could say, hey, when we have a concentration gradient, all right, all atoms and molecules will move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, all right, until equilibrium is met, all right? So just remember, we always go from a high to low concentration. All right, and once you have equilibrium, there's no high or low, it's just all the same. So there's no reason for molecules overall to move one way or the other. Now, remember from that first video, molecules are still moving around individually, randomly all the time. So they don't stop moving, all right? But overall, they're spread out. They've met equilibrium. All right, now one important thing, all right, is you might have looked at this example of a cell right here and said, well, Mr. Wolfe, it looks like this is a cell membrane. Can particles just go through the membrane? And it seems almost like a wall. Now, a cell membrane is different from a wall. It's a little bit more fluid, and it does allow some substances to pass through, but not all substances. And so that's what semi-permeable or selectively permeable means. All right, think of like semi, it's like somewhat permeable. Permeable means you could pass through. So it could pass, some things could pass through. That's what semi-permeable means. So a cell membrane allows certain substances to pass, but blocks other substances. So if we look at this example right here, we have a cell membrane, right? And I represented it by having these dashed lines. So this shows that some molecules can move in. So this blue molecule right here, maybe this is oxygen. It could get in pretty easily just through that cell membrane. Maybe this is a large protein, this red molecule right here. All right, it's not able to get through. All right. Now, a good analogy to a cell membrane is kind of like a sieve. All right, smaller particles could fall through, but larger particles cannot. Now, there are these other ways that the larger particles can eventually get in, but we're not going to talk about that in this unit. All right, so everyone, thank you for watching, and good luck completing your notes and completing the work.